guys hear me all right?
Yes, can you hear me all right?
Yes, I can hear you. I had to switch. We had
Okay.
audio. All right, I can hear you. All is good. All right, we will get started in 3 minutes. So 3 minutes yet. All right, let's get started. Okay, who here? Actually, you know what? Hate us. All right. And I could look at my notes, but it's easier to do this. Who here lives in Wisconsin? Who here lives in Wisconsin? Yes, all right. Okay, yes. People from Wisconsin, apparently there's a Packer game today. I am not, I live in Green Bay. I am in Green Bay. But yeah, I'm not a Packer fan. Not that I don't like the Packers. I think it's great for our economy, but I'm not a huge pro football fan. But I recognize world does not revolve around me. So I will try to make it concise tonight. But what I also can say is we have a midterm. Yeah, we have a midterm. Um, so that midterm is going to be released tonight after lecture. So reminder, next week you do not have to be here next Thursday, right? There's no lecture, no discussion board next Thursday. I allot you time to complete the midterm exam. So there's no excuses that there wasn't time for the midterm because I give you that time. So you'll actually have almost 2 weeks to complete the midterm because it's due October 11th, right? And it, like I said, it releases tonight after we are finished with, all right? It is through Collaborate. So the midterm is the same setup as the quiz was. So same concept, just longer and a little bit more of application of it. So, yes. So you know what? Actually, online students, yeah. No, I hope not easier. I hope they're more thought-provoking, Jade, but I guess easy is in the eye of the beholder, right? You guys hang out for a second. Online students, I'm going to give you keyword number 1, right? So sometimes I wait to the end, but today I'm going to give you the first keyword early, and keyword number 1 is midterm because next week is our midterm. So keyword number 1 is midterm. You guys do not have to do anything at all with that. I was talking to our online students. But let's get into business-to-business marketing. This is very functional, right, in terms of how we go through marketing. So let's knock this one out, and then we have global marketing to talk about as well. So business-to-business is just like it sounds. When one business markets to another business. So we have focused on what we call business to consumer, right? So we looked at what messages are going to the consumer through our videos or discussed the consumer buying process, that type. So this is specifically towards businesses. We have 4 main business markets. Resellers, which is kind of just like it sounds, right? They're buying it and reselling it. Yeah, many companies are business to business, right? So these are really a little bit more applicable. However, the marketing is vastly different, right? Because we communicate in a different way. So if I'm dealing with the government, does anyone here have a government entity as part of their target market? Right? I mean, it is vastly different. Dealing with the government, right? We're going to talk about that. And we're not going to have to do a ton of YouTube videos to try to get to the government, right? It's a different method. So that's where we're going to go. Very restricted, a lot of paperwork, right? And that's what we're going to talk about. So reseller, right? If we're looking at reselling, right, we have our manufacturer, right? So once, in this case, I'm using craft beer as an example, kind of deviating from our for something different, right? So we've got a craft beer manufacturer. They manufacture the beer. Well, it may go to a reseller or distributor rather than going to the retailer. So that's what resellers do, right? They may be a distributor type scenario in terms of craft beer. It could be like a restaurant, right? Could act as that intermediary. And then we've got a retailer. So we've got different steps, different thought processes, right? So if I'm looking at the manufacturing supply chain, so supply chain, everything from the manufacturer to the end user. If I'm looking at craft beer production, what type of incoming supplies would I need? What kind of, yeah, some type of grain, water, yeast, right? So we've got, and then we would need like packaging kind of things as well, right? We need bottles or cans or something like that. Right? Our equipment that we would need, yeah. So our power, our electricity would be kind of services that are needed. We would need labor. So we've got all of this potential, right? So if I am a craft beer manufacturer, I have a bottle supplier. I have, someone who comes in and services my tanks, who service. Do they use? Is it just yeast as the fermentation? Honey, yep, honey, if you've got your needs going on. So we've got all kinds of options, and we have all kinds of suppliers. So this can be very complex because, right, and you guys know it, right? If one part of the supply chain breaks down, it can cause mass chaos in the business market, right? Because we need all of these different components. It's different in the consumer market. In the consumer market, if we don't have one component, we can usually make do with another choice, right? If one milk supplier is having problems, I can probably get milk somewhere else. And even if I couldn't get milk somewhere else, I have some really other viable options that will still serve the same purpose. It's not quite the same in the business market, right? It's because we tend to have longer term contracts. We tend to have strategic partners. So if there's a struggle in the supply chain, it's going to affect many, many areas. Right? So when we're looking at like institutions, right? If I asked you, think of what types of products like a university or a secondary school purchase. Would you say most of them are from direct from the manufacturer or through some type of intermediary or reseller? What do you think most? Yeah, yeah, definitely a reseller or distributor of some sort, right? Now, that's great if you're the reseller, right? But what do we also know about what's happening in terms of trends in the external environment and the availability of communicating, right? That, yeah, the trends are kind of going direct, right? So if I am a reseller, part of my marketing strategy is going to be how am I going to continue to drive value, right? If you're providing value, well, then that's great and that's what should be done. But if all of a sudden technology is changing, that makes it easier to go direct, well, then I'm going to be out. For example, I worked for a reseller in Milwaukee for quite a while, and what it was is they were distribution end. Yet they and their main at the time their main customer was Shopko. So Shopko would buy through this distributor, right? And then we would buy in bulks and containers and stuff like, for example, Corel. So we would buy in all these container loads from Chicago or from China, and then we would break bulk it and stuff like that in our distribution. Yeah, I miss Shopko too. I miss their workout pants. But anyway, right? So that was our purpose, right? So we just had a percentage upcharge for the most part to do components that needed to be done, right? Well, what happened is as technology became more and more available, and Shopko built their own large distribution centers in areas, we were not needed any longer. So in essence, 80% of the business ended up, going direct. They kept a few small areas, but for the most part, they went direct. I left the company before that happened, but that's a big deal, right? So again, we have to remember what part we're playing in terms of value, even if we're dealing with business to business. The consumer buying process, we had our need recognition, analysis, evaluate, decision. This is similar to consumer, except in terms of need recognition, right? So we still have to recognize a need, whether we're a consumer or we're a business, right? And then instead of just looking at our alternatives, what a business tends to do is come up with a specification of what's needed, or a product specification. That product specification then goes to a formal request for proposal. Because we're business, we like things nice and organized, and tend to like this step-by-step process. So request for proposal goes out and asks, whatever suppliers we think can fulfill this to, provide a bid of some sort. Those bids are then analyzed and a supplier selected, and orders specification comes from there, and then after that happens, we have all kinds of vendor performance assessments and metrics, right? Yeah, a procurement request, absolutely. Request for proposal, procurement request. Yeah, same concept, right? So, need recognition. You guys know this. You're out there in the real world as well, right? So, if I'm thirsty as a consumer, my need recognition is I need to stop for something to drink. Well, how do we find a need recognition in business to business? Well, sometimes it may be in things like, the example that I have listed here that you can read, right? It may be you're going out, you're networking with suppliers, salespeople, and maybe even competitors in things like a trade show or and finding out about new technology or new ways of doing things. So it is typically through other sources that a need is recognized. And then our product specifications and our request for proposal or whatever terms used. Right? Have any of you ever been involved in putting together some type of product specifications that are used for part of the quote process? And what departments typically put together something like that? What would be the departments? Yeah, because some of it might be dependent on what you're using, right? Equipment? Yes, Caroline.
Usually like my engineering department planner is in charge of ordering stuff.
Yeah, if it's something so if you're going to be using it in the process, if you're saying it
Yeah,
comes
like
from
manufacturing equipment and stuff like that.
yeah, so it has to, because it has to be involved with the end user typically because they're the ones who really know what
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but yeah, your engineering department's going to definitely be part of that as well. And engineers are really good in terms of putting together those requests for proposal or procurement because their mindset is kind of that analytical, cover all our bases. Yeah. Now, every company is different. I worked for a company that tended, to be honest, I worked in sales and I did some of the requests for proposal rather than engineering. And I'm not sure how that happened or why that happened, but yeah, I found myself involved in areas that I really, when I look back, I'm like, I have no idea why I was. Yeah. So yeah, every company is different. There's going to be part of that culture differences. And sometimes we work together with suppliers, right? If we have a preferred supplier and we want to develop something, then we'll work with them to develop it. Right? When we're looking at our proposal analysis, right, sometimes we'll just make a decision right off the bat. Sometimes we'll kind of come back and say maybe there were 10 submissions, maybe we'll pick 3 and then kind of make those vendors kind of compete against each other on a second round, right? So there can be negotiations, especially if they're higher dollar amounts or it's a longer term contract. There may be going back and forth that will kind of be give and take type scenario. So it's not always just one and done, decide and then you're finished, right? There's all kinds of options that can come into play. When we specify an order, right, an order is placed. If the vendor is chosen, a lot of times in business, again, we have kind of that preferred vendor because once we start to build a relationship, when we start to build a relationship on that end, that there's more collaboration. So you're going to have more of that cooperative nature. So, oh, that's interesting. Has anyone else had a situation similar to what James talked about? Maybe you're over. All right, Caroline.
Yeah, like kind of the same thing. Like construction work at Mercury Marine is usually outsourced. Like big projects where they like redo the floors or the lighting or clean machinery is usually outsourced to like chemical companies or something.
Yeah. Are you guys, and this is just me gathering information. So kind of like what you said, Caroline, are you finding that more and more companies are outsourcing certain tasks? What are you guys seeing out there in the world? Like what kinds of things? Construction, I get, because that's kind of like you're not going to have your own construction analyst. But like what things are being outsourced within the organization? Cleaning, shredding, what else? What are some other things being outsourced? Again, I'm looking for data that I can use. Payroll. Yeah. Has anyone found that your company or company you worked for outsourced payroll and then brought it back in? Yeah, I've heard of that too, where it initially made sense to outsource payroll and then um, difficulties occurred and then they ended up pulling it back to an internal. Yes, Kohler is definitely outsourcing manufacturing to Asia, Mexico. Yes, I have my brother-in-law works for Kohler in their engine division. So yeah, he goes to China. HR is being person. That is interesting to me. Is it just all of HR, just kind of like what Caroline is saying, certain components like disability or your FMLA or just certain things? What kind of, again, I'm looking at trends that I'm trying to ascertain if there's big trends that are occurring in businesses in terms of, oh, and your insurance to not, yeah, insurance is tough because it changes so often. So it makes sense to hire someone who's a specialist. Okay. Well, thank you, because again, that kind of stuff is helpful to me to try to spot trends that are occurring for future classes or future discussions. This is an example of how a performance assessment might be done using vendors. So if you're a very large company or you're a government entity, right, there's some type of assessment that occurs that says, hey, this is going well or it's not going well. Have any of you ever experienced putting together some type of assessment like this or seen something similar? Maybe different verbiage or different words. Somewhere along the line, it may not be like this is, a very formal type software that's used, but sometimes it's not always quite so formal. Hold on, I'm just going to, okay, remind me, I cannot, okay. I just wanted to shut the door because there is some stuff in the hall. But here's the deal. We are not taking any breaks because if I go out the door is going to lock behind me. And let me just give you a fun little story. Right? It happened a couple of semesters ago where it was my class and a counseling class. So the counseling classes still require in-person meeting, right? So there's a couple of counseling classes here on campus and myself, and I set the class on break, it's like, I don't know, 7:30 or whatever, and went out to go to the restroom and the door locked behind me. And in the classroom was my car keys, was my phone, and there's no one here on campus that's staff. Yeah, so I'm like, I can see everything, right? So I go and I interrupt the counseling class because I know the instructor. She's been teaching a long time too. And I'm like, hey, Julie, uh, do you happen to have the center director's number? Because I'm thinking I have to call someone to come in and unlock my door. I've never had my door locked behind me before. Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. There was a dude in there who was a student, but he was like, he grew up as like an army brat kind of thing. And yeah, there's no facilities. Facilities are they leave at 6:30 a lot of times. So there's no one for facilities, but everything's locked. And so I actually went to the computer lab. I could get in there, but I couldn't get into any of my accounts because of my phone. It wanted to do the authentication, and I could not press that it was me, so I couldn't get into any account. My students they were like, I put them on break. They come back from break, and I'm not there, right? It's just dead. And, I'm sure they were like typing like, oh, you're back, and nothing, right? Nothing from me because I can't get in to collaborate because I couldn't authenticate and do a secondary commit. So anyway, I ended up getting the lock picked. It took about like 20 minutes. I got the lock, they dinking around. Ended up getting the lock picked and I could get in, but my poor students. So I feel like, so for a while I was like, okay, if something like that happens and you don't hear from me in 5 minutes, you're excused with no repercussions on your end, right? So we're going to plug through. I'm not going to give you a break because I don't want to trust going out because the door is locked. I can tell it's locked from the inside because I'm not in my normal room. They didn't unlock it. So, right, last point. Last one, I know. Yeah, exactly. If the teacher's not there, I mean, you shouldn't have to be quiet. Exactly. Yeah, I know. But then, yeah, which I could, right? My luck, I would put like a chair in front of it and then someone would come by and be like, why is this chair there? And they'd move the chair and lock the door. So culture, right? How do companies make decisions, right? So we have different methods of how we can make decisions. We can make decisions in a democratic process. Everyone gets a vote. We can make it in terms of consensus. We all have to come together and make a decision. Autocratic, do as whoever is the person in charge, right? Consultative, kind of a little bit of all of that, right? So kind of pulling it together. So do any of you have experience in like a consensus or consultative type arrangement where maybe your department's making a big purchase and they ask a bunch of different opinions in terms of consulting? It's kind of messy when it's that way. Okay, what would be the benefits to being, involved in the decision-making process? What would be the benefits? Yeah, so autocratic. And so what are the benefits to being more consensus democratic? Yeah, sometimes different perspectives are very helpful, right? So when we have different perspectives, maybe with different departments or different individuals, that can help expand and maybe steer the decision-making process a little differently because again, that different, right? So autocratic is very, very efficient is autocratic, right? Because you can make decisions and complete it right away. It's very efficient. But sometimes it's a good idea, kind of like Caroline is saying, to get a little bit messy and inefficient by bringing in others that, again, may give us a different perspective. Three different types of buying decisions: new buy, modified rebuy, and straight rebuy, right? And they're just like they sound. A new buy, if I'm a company and it's the first time I am buying a new forklift, right, it's going to take me a whole lot more time and effort to go out and do, my requests look at what options I even want, right? There's many, many different choices in forklifts. So what am I going to do? What are the options I want? What are the pricing that I want? So that new buy, there's much more involvement. And then what happens is maybe I modify it. So the basis is still there, but I might have to make some changes, and that's a little bit less involvement than our new buy. Or our straight revises, there's no changes, we just keep doing the same thing, and that's the least amount of involvement. So we want to assess. So if we're doing, a new buy, we might bring more people into the decision because it's already going to take longer. But, typically with a straight rebuy, it's already set. Okay. There's our checks. That's a great example, right? So you had experience with that forklift, maybe good service from who you bought it from, but yeah, you changed what you're looking at in terms of the features offered, right? So no homework for chapter 7, right? Still might be on the, no chapter 7 homework. There will be chapter 8 homework though. So pretty straightforward. All right. So we're going to go right to global, that international global perspective. And again, this is kind of a fast lecture as well, but we'll have time. There's like no videos tonight or anything like that because we're not dealing with the consumer. So global marketing, right? So why does a company trade globally? Right? Typically it's because they need to grow, right? There's immense pressure for businesses to have continued growth. It's either pressure from internal shareholders or external shareholders if they're publicly traded. So as a company continues to mature, right, the more mature it becomes, right, the less we have to grow domestically, right? We've already, as Starbucks opened up in cities of 100,000 people or more, right? That was kind of their first run. Well, then when they went into smaller cities, well, they kind of like, okay, we've kind of maxed out domestically for right now, so they needed to go internationally to continue that growth. And that's global marketing. Now, when we are looking at marketing, we look at the complexity factor of it on that supply chain. So, for example, if I'm a local restaurant and I'm selling a local beer, right? So, in this case, the beer manufacturer is bringing it to the restaurant, which doesn't happen very often. The restaurant's bringing it to the consumer, right? So that is our supply chain. And we're here, so everything is happening in US dollars. That's USD, US dollars. So it's a fairly straightforward in terms of that logistical. But in most cases, what happens is we have our beer manufacturer, and that beer manufacturer's product goes to that reseller, right? So our reseller, and then that reseller carries many, many different brands of local craft beers. So they deliver to the restaurant, and they may deliver, 20 different types of beers to this restaurant, and it still goes to the consumer. So again, it's a little bit more complex, but again, we're here in the US, it's still all in US dollars in terms of accounting, so relatively straightforward. I can add complexity by kind of expanding out across regions or states, right? So I might have my beer manufacturer, and at the time that I did this, I should look it up again to see what it is this year, but at this time, California was the #1 craft beer producing state. Can someone open up a tab and look at what it is for 2023? Like, what's the #1 craft beer producing state in the US? What is the number one craft beer? Is it still, the year before it was Denver, it was Colorado, and then it went to California, and actually I didn't recheck it for this year. So anyone find a decent source for the number one craft beer state? They still see California, so California's holding on, all right? So I'm here and I want to buy this, California craft beer. So, yeah, I used to travel to Denver for work all the time. Every Utah. Really, Pennsylvania is number two? Is there like a big producer out of Pennsylvania? Gosh, I can't even think of a brand that's out of Pennsylvania. Interesting. Okay, you see Colorado? Yeah. That is interesting. So Pennsylvania might be up there. I guess it depends on the website. But the fact that they've got to be somewhat close. What brands come out? I agree, Jade. Yeah, that is funny. Yeah, I'm quite sure. Yeah, I don't know the exact stats anymore, but yes, alcohol consumption tends to go hand in hand. For craft beer, I knew we were number one for at for a while for like mass-produced beer, Milwaukee connection. Um, yeah, and there are a lot of people in Wisconsin that don't drink. Yeah, for beer in general. That's. I mean, do you guys remember Laverne and Shirley? You guys are young. I'm older. Yeah, but do you remember Shirley? Yeah, I mean, whenever I think of beer, I actually think of Laverne and Shirley and the Milwaukee beer. So yeah. Oh, you're a young one. Yes, flats. I mean, from a marketing standpoint, the resurgence of the brand Pabst is a great marketing story, right? How kind of went down and, now Pabst is, back on the upswing, which is interesting. Anyway, I will keep our time good so you guys, for those who do want to watch the game, I will have you out the 7:15 start, right? I think, again. All right. So local restaurant here and selling a California craft beer. So we still have our manufacturer. Oh, this shifted in the upload. Okay. But now we may have more than one reseller. We might have a West Coast reseller going to, a Central, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. To even go on this, like, have any of you noticed that one of the newer type alcohol drinks that are in cans, like the ready-to-drink drinks, right? That's been kind of popular from a standpoint. It's now the press, Press. You guys know what press is? PR. Yeah, a press is an alcoholic drink that's like with seltzer. And I used to bartend when I was young, and that's how I knew this because I would make drinks, right? And I saw in the grocery store last semester that they actually had now drinks that were called, brandy press or vodka press or whatever. And it was, I'm like, oh my gosh, that is a blast from the past. So yes, press, how, again, kind of like that Pabst thing, how things come along in cycles. All right, so out of state, we might have complexity in the distributors, but again, we still have the US dollar. Okay? Slowly but surely, I'm getting over. But what if I'm selling now a German craft beer? So I'm a restaurant here, but I'm selling a beer that's made in Germany, right? Not just a German beer that's made here in the US, but actually getting it from Germany. So we've got a German manufacturer. And in Germany, their currency is euros, right? So when the German manufacturer sells to the reseller, right, and this is a ship, right, because the reseller is probably going to come by boat, the product by boat, maybe by airplane, but probably by boat, right? So somewhere in this line between the manufacturer and the consumer, we have retailers, intermediaries, distributors. Somewhere there's an exchange from euros to US dollars. It may happen at the resale level, the first one, the second one, the third one. It depends on how it's negotiated. But now we've added a significant amount of complexity with the conversion of euros to US dollars. So how do we go about deciding how we want to expand internationally? Well, it's not any different than what we did before, looking at that external environment. If I'm a domestic company and I'm looking at expanding my product line, I'm going to take a look and figure out which of these external factors are strong and which align with what I make, what value is being provided. So for example, from a demographic standpoint, I would use things like age, income, education. Right? So if I am looking to, go and try to get a bunch of people that would be employees, it would not be in Japan. Japan's a country that has an aging population. The U.S. does as well. So I'm certainly not going to expand out to Japan with the hopes of trying to build my workforce internally, because it's not there. However, if I am a company, and maybe I'm, like I said, my example, I'm selling toothpaste. I've got this great toothpaste, and it's, maybe there's a lot of, it's an age-related toothpaste, so maybe I'm going to expand to Japan that also has a large segment of older people as part of their population, or whatever it might be. Right? Income demographics. Right? Would it make any sense for a luxury clothes manufacturer to open a sales office in Zambia? The average income in Zambia can't afford luxury clothes. So it would be somewhere where I go, right? I mean, it kind of makes sense. But again, we've talked about how sometimes we do things that just don't make sense in business, right? Switzerland would be a much better choice for a luxury clothes manufacturer. Okay. Education. What countries might be good prospects to expand textbook sales of a U.S. textbook? What countries might be good prospects? What do you think? What might be some criteria for countries? If I'm a textbook manufacturer and I'm looking to try to expand out. What language? What language would I want to make as part of my criteria? Yeah, you're right. Looking at nations. Yeah, if we're going to talk about cultural, is our next one, right? So sometimes we're going to expand into a market where it's very similar to what I'm marketing here, right? Because if I have got, if I'm an F-150, right, an F-150, and I have a certain market, right? So if you had to describe the typical buyer of a Ford F-150, again, what would that be? We've looked at Ford quite a bit. What would it be? What are some of the traits of the typical Ford F-150 buyer? Outdoorsy, adventurous, right? Yep, so they might use it for the occupation, right? So if I am going to look at expanding the F-150 line, I'm going to probably try to go to areas that have a culture that's going to match what I'm doing, right? So if I'm looking for trying to expand the recreation component, I'm going to go to a country that, number one, there's the income and infrastructure, but that, you're going to go to a country that has a significant portion of their population that likes to do outdoorsy things that would find value from my effort, right? Yeah, people who like to work on things. Again, the whole concept of using it for your occupation. I put an example here because it's a real life example for me, right? I used to do business in Turkey. So now, being able to do business in Turkey, I mean, it happened. It wasn't very common at the time I was there. But again, I was in a very male-dominated industry anyway. So, I'm going into these Turkish companies and absolutely never ever, I don't care if it was 105 degrees, I never ever wore short sleeves because some of the people that I dealt with, in fact, the vast majority of people that I dealt with in terms of sales would have found that offensive. So I always wore long sleeve, no matter what, right? So that was a cultural component that I had to be aware of in order to do business in that country. Right? What might be a cultural concern for packaging? Okay, so a U.S. Goods manufacturer, what might I want to watch out for in terms of packaging if I'm selling my product in a different country? Yeah, translation issues, right? Sometimes how the name translates. What else? What might I want to be mindful of, right? So, yeah, the material that's used, the legal issues. Yeah, sometimes it's just as simple as what pictures I use, right? So if I'm trying to sell something to another country, I'm going to change some of my visuals, right? If I am selling a product into Mexico, I'm going to change my visuals. If I'm selling into Eastern Europe, I'm going to change my visuals, right? So translation, verbiage, colors, all of that, I have to be very mindful. Yeah. It's not econ. Yeah, you would not sell beef in India, right? Which actually we'll talk about that in just a little bit when we look at McDonald's. Right? So from an economic standpoint, this isn't an econ class, but these three terms are economic related. These are econ related. So developed, developing, and underdeveloped are economic classifications used to discern where a company is in terms of how well the population within that country, how much they can live in terms of being able to buy food and transact business, and what types of infrastructures there. So a developed country in economic terms would be like the United States, right? We have very strong infrastructure. We've got, systems and controls that can happen. Japan, developed country. Western Europe, mostly developed countries, right? So developed, kind of the leaders when we look at the world stage. Underdeveloped is that exact opposite. Underdeveloped would be countries like Zimbabwe. Countries that are probably under a fair amount of political unrest, or countries that, again, are just so poor due to whatever circumstances. A lot of times it's political. They don't have good, strong road systems. They don't have, if I was a company wanting to go over there and trying to sell to them, a lot of the people would not even be able to afford what it is, right? They are just surviving and maybe not even surviving. So those are the two ends of the spectrum. Developing is that in between. So an example of a developing country would be like India. India is still considered developing, partially because it's just this huge honking country. So you've got some areas that are very developed, but then you have other parts of India where, just even the basic necessities of food and water and shelter, they're having a hard time meeting because again, it's such a big, so they're kind of in that middle ground. Right? Can anyone else think of a country or maybe throw some things out that you think might be a developing country? They're starting, they've got some things going for them, but they're not quite all the way there yet in terms of providing that infrastructure. Might be another country. So India's, yeah, I think China would still be developed. And again, it kind of got that extreme because, boy, some parts are so technologically advanced. And then, yeah, they got that extreme, like in the United States, there's some areas that are definitely more poverty struggled when you get like some of your Appalachia, but this isn't, like our poor in the United States is not even close to the poor that's in like a Zambia and even China. Yeah, so South Africa, yeah, I would say yes, South Africa would be developing. We used to do business in South Africa. They were far ahead, but yeah, Iran, that is a great question because there the politics are such. I don't know enough about Iran. Like Saudi Arabia would be, boy. I'd have to actually look at the economic stats for like a country like Saudi Arabia. I want to say developed, but there might be a significant amount of people that are super poor, even though they shouldn't be, and that's just based on the political regime. Yeah, so developed, you're safe with thinking developed of like Japan. Yeah, and you can have segregation in South Africa, but if the segregated areas still have basic necessities, um, then it's, where they can still transact. I mean, it might not be right in terms of the segregation from what we would consider a moral standpoint, but if they are still able to economically have an economic system, it would still be fine. Would still be considered from, again, just a strictly economic standpoint. So if Arabia has lots of poverty, then yeah, we put it under that, again, that economic classification of developing, but know that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity in certain areas of that. Kind of just like India as well. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity because India is growing at such a fast rate. So again, we look at, what can the nation afford? Does it have stability? And when we're looking at really, really big areas, right, maybe the part of that country I'm going to first go to is going to be stable in terms of economy and infrastructure. Have you guys heard the term foreign direct investment, FDI? Foreign investment, foreign direct investment? So FDI, foreign direct investment, you may hear that term. Okay, so what foreign direct investment means, right, is, say I'm a country, I'm Ford Automotive here in the United States. When I go and open up and build a manufacturing site in Mexico, that is considered foreign direct investment. I, as a United States company, have gone into another country and I have invested directly by putting up a new plant, right, or putting up a new sales office. So that's called foreign direct investment. So foreign direct investment, watching those tides of where companies are going, right? So all of a sudden, if you look at it from a standpoint of like the United States, right? So when automotive manufacturers first started to manufacture outside the United States, it tended to be Mexico. Part of that is just because it's close by, right? It's just natural progression, right? So it's close, yep. And it was significantly cheaper. And that is just how, again, this is an econ class, but that's how things work from an economic standpoint in the world, right? So you have a developed country, right? In the United States, right, we were a manufacturing country for a long, long time, right? You even just go back and think about automotive, right? The automotive, um, you know, supply to the world, right? But what has happened, right, is our economy has shifted, right? So, okay, we could manufacture, but then now all of a sudden, well, really, it's Mexico is not that far away, right? So, for example, the company that I worked for, we did a lot of work in the southern part of the United States, in the Phoenix area. Well, you know what? From Phoenix to Juarez is not far, right? It's an hour drive. So we put up a plant in Juarez, Mexico. Hour over the border. So it was and it was much cheaper. It was cheaper to build a plant, and the labor was cheaper. Um, and it made sense from a logistical standpoint. So that is how things, so all of a sudden, what happens though is before, right, Mexico used to be the cheapest place to get labor. Anyone know where the cheapest places are now, right? Mexico's not the cheapest anymore. Where? Yeah, so we get China, India, and even India starting to increase their prices. China is kind of an anomaly just because of how their politics. But yeah, India used to be, but what happens is more and more foreign direct investment comes in. The wages get higher and higher. And then what happens is Mexico used to be underdeveloped, wages were cheap, foreign direct investment came in, and now wages are increasing. So Mexico went from being an underdeveloped to a developing nation. That's the progression, right? So that continues to flow. So all of a sudden now, right, so as Mexico's labor costs went up and up, yeah, they found other areas to go to, right? Indonesia, right? So that is the progression from a global economic standpoint, that flow of money. So I know it sounds like, oh, it's, the labor is so cheap, it's, in Mexico, but that needed to happen in order for them to go to a developing country to get economic system and make improvement. They needed that foreign direct investment. Again, just from a strictly an economic explanation. Right? Social components. Right? We all know not all countries hold the same social thought processes. Right? A developing or underdeveloped country is not going to hold much stance in being a environmentally conscious type company. Right? We know that from China. Right? China could care less about what's being put in the air. They don't care, right? So we can't control China. So we're going to have those developing or underdeveloped countries. They're going to have different norms than we have, and we need to be aware of that as to if we're doing business there or if we're building there. Okay. Technology has allowed all of this to happen at a faster and faster pace, right? We have large access to information, we can transfer information, and we can now sell globally because of technology and the availability to communicate. I'm looking at other areas. I want to try to align some of the political and legal components. That's why you'll find that a lot of companies will, again, kind of do business in other developed nations initially, in terms of some, especially if you've got lots of patents and things like that, because of the similar legal practices, right? How they ascertain private property. That's a great point, Jane. Yeah, you're right. So as India is becoming more and more developed, yeah, they're changing their thought process, because they're learning more. And it kind of makes sense, because if you're thinking of it, if I just need to have my basic necessities, I am a country that is just trying to get my act together, right? I am trying to provide, food, water, shelter, because of whatever reason. Again, usually it's political unrest and all that type of stuff that's going on. But I'm trying to set up an infrastructure where I can just get basic necessities. They're probably not going to worry about recycling, because, and we wouldn't either. If it's a matter of a basic necessity, that's a basic necessity. That's where all our thought process. But as we grow and learn more, yeah, we're going to bring up some of those other components. So here are my progressions into foreign markets. We're going to talk about strategy. What was the edible spoon made out of? Edible spoon? I'm just wondering what it was, because it sounds kind of weird. I wonder what it tasted like. Yeah, I think that would be a tough sell in the United States, an edible spoon. Although I guess they have like edible straws. Straws. Yeah, I love mushrooms, but. Oh, yeah, carcinogens, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could see, like, because they have those straws that you can kind of, that make your, same concept. I know, I know. I'm with you on paper straws. I reuse my plastic straws, but I don't like them. I don't like the way a paper straw feels. I'm kind of weird that way. But I'm also the same one that I don't really water bottles. Like if I'm buying bottled water, um, I they can't crinkle, or it drives me crazy. So I'll spend more on a water bottle that doesn't crinkle. But that's just me. But there have to be others like me too, or else they wouldn't make non-crinkling water bottles. So, all right, let's talk about our progression. Again, this kind of is a little bit different than the textbook because this is just more accurate. Okay, so if I'm a company here, I have a product here in the United States and it's doing very well. So I'm manufacturing my product here and growing, and I've kind of done a search and said, okay, well, you know what, there is demand for our product outside the United States. Typically, the first way I go international is by exporting. Meaning, I make my product here in the United States, and then I just ship it to wherever it needs to go. So that's usually the first step. Right? And it's a higher cost because I've got shipping costs now. Still, I have complexity because there's going to be a US dollar to whatever, there's going to be a currency transaction. I'm going to have lower control in terms of just the shipping, how things are shipped. But I do control the transaction. The next way, the next progression is by licensing and franchising. So all of a sudden, I'm producing, I'm shipping a lot out, I'm exporting a lot, and then maybe I have some really good customers that are in Germany, right? So I have a relationship with my customers in Germany, and they're like, you know what, we would really not like to have to pay all this shipping. Can you somehow set up a place in Germany where we can get your product? And I might say, okay, and I find someone who can do what I do, provide my product under my brand name, and I license it or franchise it to them. So that's the next step. It's now fill the need of my German market. However, I've kind of lowered my control because now they're manufacturing it, they're dealing with the customer. But again, we have a licensing or franchising agreement. I'm getting compensated for it. So it's kind of a win-win situation. Next progression would be strategic alliances and joint ventures. So instead of kind of franchising it into my German, I might say, okay, here's a company in Germany, and we start talking, and we're like, you know what, let's make a joint venture together. So that would be, so I'm company A, they're company B, we come together and form a company C. That's called a joint venture, a new company. Or we can just say, you know what, let's work together. So maybe they've got a slightly different product that they do, and maybe I start selling it in the United States for them, and maybe they sell. So we somehow come up with what's called a strategic alliance. We collaborate in some manner. A lot of different ways to how we do that. Wholly owned subsidiaries, these two kind of align, okay, under that foreign direct investment. Okay. So if I'm doing an acquisition or if I'm building it from scratch, it's still foreign direct investment. Okay. So wholly owned subsidiary means I put up a new plant. Right? I built something there, I put in the sales office there, I am producing there, I have invested into that country somehow. An acquisition would be instead of building it, I just buy something there and make it my own. So maybe I buy that German company, but I relabel it, you know, Company A, because it's now Company A. So instead of building it from scratch, I buy it in acquisition. So that's the complexity and a skew of how investment goes in terms of strategy. Let's talk about the terminology for strategy, and then I'm going to give you your homework, and we're going to be done. Okay, so this kind of transferred over. This is control, this is cost, and this is differentiation. This just shifted over in Blackboard. Okay. So our three different types of international strategies called global efficiency, multi-domestic, and transnational. Okay. Global efficiency is a company that likes to keep control, is super focused on being efficient, and has a product that doesn't need to differentiate much, no matter where it's sold. Okay? So an example of global efficiency would be Apple products, right? If I am Apple, right, I keep control at my Apple headquarters, right? Everything comes through that, right? Now, in Apple's case, they're not like a super high efficient company like a Walmart or that, like when we think of that in terms of efficiency, but the product is not different. An iPhone is an iPhone, right? You might have slight variations between here and Europe based on satellites and that kind of stuff, but for the most part, an iPhone's an iPhone. It doesn't. Now, an example of a complete opposite is called multi-domestic. And a multi-domestic company is one that says, okay, we provide this product on an international basis, but we are in a super competitive industry where things change quickly. So if everything is done out of the home office, it's going to take too long. We want to react more to the market by being able to differentiate the product, by being reactive on a local scale. So a multi-domestic, right, gives a lot of leeway to those business units that are outside of their home division. So that way they can adapt. Okay. Transnational is a meshing of those two. So that's why it kind of depends. You know, this is like a middle of the road type approach. Here's the deal. Almost all companies typically tend to fit in transnational, okay? So let's walk through McDonald's. So if I had to ask, if I asked you, right, if I asked you, of these three, does McDonald's keep control at home, or do they give control to all of the restaurants and franchisee owners over the world? What do you think? They will tend to keep control at home. You know, so you are, if you are a franchisee of McDonald's, you have very stringent guidelines of what your store looks like, what you're offering, where you're getting your product from, right? Can a McDonald's owner go get their product from anywhere? There are going to be some regional differences, but they keep control. They are very stringent. And to be honest, they need to be. That's part of McDonald's competency, right? If I go to McDonald's here in the US and if I go to McDonald's in Europe, can I get French fries? And are they going to be similar? There's going to be slight differences. But yeah, you get French fries, you're going to get French fries everywhere, no matter where you go. If I go to the McDonald's in India, I'm going to get French fries. Likely. Yeah, but they're fries, right? They might be called something different, but the product is essentially the same. Again, that's part of that packaging component and that naming component. They might change. Yeah, so they will tend to keep a here. And part of that is because they do have a high cost focus. Their business model is based on being efficient. That's part of their core competencies. Now, partly though, in terms of differentiation, they're going to be kind of middle, right? Because just like Ian said before, right, if you go into India and order a Big Mac, it's not going to have beef, right? It's going to have a veggie patty. Now, it's still going to be similar to a Big Mac. It's going to have you know, similarities, but yeah, it's going to be a veggie patty instead of beef, right? Has anyone here been to a Europe McDonald's where they serve wine? They serve alcohol, wine and beer. Yeah, you can go to, when I traveled in Western Europe, go to McDonald's and, you know, it's noon and you could grab a beer, grab a glass of wine. That was very common. Yeah, I know. It's, although I'm new and I'm like, oh, but yeah, that's because so there are some regional differences. We see regional differences with McDonald's here, right? We talked about you can get a brat in Green Bay, but you can't, Western Germany. So again, you know, we can't, I would call, if I had to, I would call McDonald's global efficiency. But here's the deal, if you went and did an internet search, you're going to get just as many people who are going to call them transnational. So don't just put in an internet search because you can get lots of opinions, and some of them are going to be completely wrong, right? So Procter and Gamble. Right? Procter and Gamble has actually just kind of shifted their strategy more to this, right? They used to be transnational with some home, but as part of their overall change in global strategy, 3 or 4 years ago, they changed their organizational structure and reporting to make it that wherever that business unit is, where that product division is by geography, they had the ability to make decisions there and then to best adapt to the market, right? So yeah, so these change, but that's international strategy as a whole. All right, there's your homework, right? So take the company you've chosen and detail an international expansion that you think would be beneficial. And again, there's kind of leeway. If they've already done some international expansion, you can talk about that. If you have not, if it's a company that doesn't make any sense, then yeah. So if you've got lots out there, go through. Again, you don't have to overthink it, right? Couple of paragraphs. It doesn't have to be pages and pages of work. But if you do use outside sources, make sure you cite, right? So paragraph to explain, paragraph to cons, or this would be your option, okay? So outline what they're doing or talk about how this might be a future option, beneficial to them. And maybe it's not that you're doing sales internationally. Maybe there are some trends that are going on internationally that might be beneficial for you, right? That might be catching new trends that occur. Yeah, exactly, especially in winter, right? Yeah, I mean, well, Lakeland has a campus in Japan. They have a Japan campus. I don't know how that started, although I should because it's happened while I've been here, but I don't, but yeah. Or you could even like talk about Costa Rica and then, okay, so that would be, so maybe come into a little bit of, whatever's applicable in terms of how to best adapt this topic to what your company is, right? So Jade, was the classmate from Japan or were they here in the US and then they went? I'm just wondering who the actual target market is there. If it's US citizens going to Japan to learn or if it's actually students in Japan learning via the US model. Just from Japan, okay. Oh, that's good to know. That's so interesting. Now I've been teaching forever, and I've never had a Japan student from that campus. So interesting. I've had students from Afghanistan. Most of them were serving in the military. Not. All right. There's your homework. You guys hang on just a second. Online students, keyword number two is trend, right? So there's your two keywords if you're listening to the recording. Okay, you guys here, your attendance is good to go. If you have a question or questions, stay back. But if not, you are free to go. I will go and double check. I may have to change the start time. So you may not see the midterm exam yet because we're done a little early, but I will open up that midterm exam as soon as we say, all right, good night. Have a great weekend. See you in a couple of weeks, right? A couple weeks.